I want to talk first about the General Assembly resolution, which I think didn't get enough attention and was disturbing in a lot of ways apart from the ICC. The first is it wasn't just recognizing Palestine as a state, it includes a definition of the borders, and it stipulates including East Jerusalem and all territories conquered by Israel in 1967. This really rubs in what is the underlying reality of this, which is the Palestinians committed almost 20 years ago that there would be negotiations over the borders. And now the UN has said, well, forget about that. The borders are this, and the UN has said so. That's, I think, going to make it much more difficult to have negotiations if they ever get back to negotiating, because it's really hard for the Palestinians to accept less than what the UN says they're entitled to. The second thing that was disturbing was the timing of this. It was just after these Hamas rocket attacks and after Israel's very restrained response. A lot of European governments did condemn the Hamas missile attacks, rocket attacks. A lot of European governments praised Israel for its restraint, and that didn't make any difference. And they said, a number of European governments, well, we thought it was important to encourage the other side of Palestine, the peaceful side that wants to negotiate. If that's how this game is going to be played, then it doesn't really matter what Hamas does, because there's always another side of Palestine that will reap the benefit of it while people say, tut-tut on you, but we want to reward the other side. So I think that was a disturbing aspect. And the third thing, just about the resolution, there was a shift in votes from a year ago. You probably recall a year ago the battle was Palestine should be a member of UNESCO. And the Obama administration really mobilized, and of course there was an overwhelming majority saying, yes, welcome to UNESCO. But most European states either abstained or voted no. There were 5 that actually voted no. A year later, when the question is not so specialized as UNESCO, but just like, should you be a member of the UN? Well, not a voting member, but an affiliate, an observer member. Everybody in Europe decided that they couldn't oppose this. Only the Czech Republic voted no. Sweden, which last year had voted no to UNESCO, this year voted yes to joining the UN as an observer. Germany, which voted no last year, this year decided that it would abstain. So there's been an erosion of European support for Israel, or let's say resistance to a Palestinian state before there is a settlement there. I don't know what is the background to this. The two obvious explanations are the Obama administration tried hard last year and didn't try very hard this year, or it did try this year behind the scenes, but no one's listening to them anymore. And as it's very possible. They're leading from behind, and they're just too far behind, and so it doesn't matter, and the Europeans just decide what they want to do on their own. So let me get to the International Criminal Court. This was always a potential threat. Back in 1998, when they just completed the negotiation for the statute of the International Criminal Court, I remember John Bolton said, the only interesting thing about this institution is, will it first indict an Israeli official or an American official? And I think it's pretty clear the answer is no. First, they will go after an Israeli official. There are provisions in the Rome Statute which were put there to apply to Israel. Most notably this, let me read it to you so you don't think that I'm being sarcastic. It defines, among other things that are war crimes, the transfer, directly or indirectly, by the occupying power of parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. This phrase, transfer indirectly, means you let people go there. And that, read literally, and it was meant to be read literally, means if you allow people to move into apartments in East Jerusalem, that is a war crime. It's not even talking about building them. I mean, building new apartments. Just somebody rents an apartment in East Jerusalem and you allowed that, that's a war crime. We don't know whether the International Criminal Court will be prepared to pursue that. We don't even know whether the Palestinians want to pursue that. What we know for sure is they want to pursue something. After the Gaza war in 2008, 2009, the Palestinians petitioned the International Criminal Court to take jurisdiction and to prosecute Israeli war crimes in Gaza. The prosecutor spent 2 years mulling that over and finally announced, which he could have done in the first week, actually, no, we don't have jurisdiction because Palestine is not a state. In the run-up to this resolution, just last week, the United Kingdom said to the Palestinians, we'd like to vote for this, but you have to promise us that you won't go back to the ICC. And they refused to say that. And in fact, they've said publicly they are going back to the ICC. We don't know for what. One thing which many people have missed is the way the ICC statute was written. You can be a full member, and then you've just said, come after us whenever you think we did something wrong. But if you don't want to join because you don't want the ICC to come after you whenever you've done something wrong, you have this alternative, which is you can, as a non-member, say, we would like you to take jurisdiction over this situation. And the word is situation is very vaguely defined. I mean, it isn't defined, situation. They could say, which is what they did last time, we want you to look at what happened in Gaza in 2009 and nothing else. Nothing, we don't want you to look at rocket attacks in Israel. We don't want you to look at terrorist bombings. Just look at this part of it. It's possible that the ICC would agree to that. I think the statute makes that very plausible. It's possible that they would say, well, no, we can't just look at that. We think the situation means the whole context, so we will also look at crimes committed by Palestinians or people in Gaza. We just don't know. It's possible they will say you're a member of the UN, but only an observer status, so we don't think you're really a state, and you have to be really a state. There are a lot of ways of threading through this, and we don't know what they're going to do. I just offer you as background, they have so far had only one case in 10 years since they've been operating. Only one case has actually gone through a whole trial, and that is now on appeal. So they're very slow. They don't do many cases. This could be delayed for a long time. The one complaint that's heard most often, at least in the General Assembly, is they've had, I think, 5 cases now which are at some stage. They've announced that they want to go after this person, and that person. They're all in Africa. And people say, why are you picking on Africa? Why are you picking on Africa? It's really unfair you're picking on Africa. At the end of the term of the first prosecutor, Senor Moreno Ocampo from Argentina, they elected a new prosecutor. And by the way, this is all up to the prosecutor at the outset. And the new prosecutor is from Africa, I think from Ghana, Madame Betsouda. And the thing that is, we just don't know. She's from Africa, so she will feel really a lot of pressure to indict someone from outside Africa. And I think we can all agree Israel is outside Africa. Not by much, but it is. And probably that would be popular among people who are criticized going after leaders in Africa. On the other hand, she was the deputy to Moreno Ocampo. So maybe she feels, no, I'm following in his path, which is caution. It wouldn't surprise me if the ICC found some way to just drop this, because it would be really explosive. It wouldn't at all surprise me. I think you have to say it's at least even odds that they feel pressured to do something, because the General Assembly voted, with everyone understanding this was a potential stake, the General Assembly voted to say, yes, Palestine is sort of like a state. The General Assembly did as much for Palestine as they could. They couldn't make them a full member of the UN. That requires the Security Council, so they went as far as they could go. And that is a pretty strong signal to the ICC, yes, we want this. So I think when you think about the ramifications of a possible prosecution of an Israeli, think about this in 3 categories. First, how the Europeans would react. They pay for the ICC. It is not funded from the general UN budget. There's separate And it's not even like the UN budget apportioned by some formula. Countries offer up what they want to offer up. Something like a quarter of the budget comes from Germany. The Europeans could destroy this immediately if they said, no, we're shocked by this indictment. We didn't think it would come to this. This is terrible. We didn't want this. We are withdrawing our financial support. That would be ruinous. Are they prepared to do that? I don't know. I think it would be kind of humiliating for them because, yes, they fund it. On the other hand, they created it, and it's kind of their baby, and they host it, and they talk about it, and they praise it. Most of the world criticizes it or ignores it. So I think it would be very hard for them. There's a lot at stake for them. This is, sad to say, one of the important projects of EU diplomacy in the world, and for them to admit one of our kind of signature creations has turned out to be bad news, I think it will be hard for them. My guess is the most likely thing is different countries say different things and they can't agree on what to do, and because they have this sense that the EU should act together, they won't do anything as drastic as withdraw their funding for the ICC. And I think over the next year there'll be a lot of, let's say, background discussions in Europe about what the ICC can expect. And it might deter the ICC, it might embolden the ICC, we'll have to see. But I think it will be a big deal for Europe how it reacts. And second is the American reaction. We don't have so much direct leverage on the ICC because, of course, we're not members. We don't fund it at all. We don't really cooperate with it very much. But potentially, if there is an ICC indictment of an Israeli official for, which is what the Palestinians were asking for in the first round, targeting in Gaza in 2009, I think it is almost impossible that they could find an episode to prosecute which Israel was guilty of and the United States is not guilty of in our military actions in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think that's impossible. Going forward, this would be kind of scary precedent. It's scarier to me than to many other conservatives because I've now talked to a lot of people in the Pentagon. They all hate the ICC. But the judge advocates corps, they love having precedents, and they love saying, well, no, this is a legal issue, it's very important, it's a legal issue. And so they just glom onto anything they have out there as a precedent, and you can see the bureaucratic politics of this. Lawyers become more important in the Pentagon if they can show, oh, there'll be severe legal consequences if you don't listen to my advice. And my advice is not just my opinion, it's based on precedent. So even though we're not parties to this, even though we're not bound by it, it is bound to percolate through the Pentagon bureaucracy and I think have an inhibiting effect on what we do going forward, even if we are never indicted. In a way, the peculiar viciousness of this is it has the most effect on countries that aren't going to be indicted, which just kind of pull back because they're afraid. I think if there is an indictment of an Israeli, this will have it will put a strain in U.S.-European relations because basically the Europeans have allowed this to happen, and it is threatening to the United States, and what about that, guys? And I think they will say in Europe, well, you know, these things happen, and it's all part of global governance and international institutions, and I think that will make the United States more cautious in dealing with the Europeans. I give you one example, which to me was very telling. During the Libyan war last year, or whatever you call it, the Libyan intervention, the defense minister of Britain kept saying publicly in Parliament, in every single one of our bombing attacks we have carefully studied, the Attorney General has reviewed them to make sure they are consistent because we don't want any possibility of an indictment by the International Criminal Court. I don't know what they said about that in the Pentagon. They sure didn't say anything in public. But if there is actually an indictment, so we see the International Criminal Court is something serious, it's going to have an inhibiting effect on us. I think it's going to have more of an inhibiting effect on Europeans. If even the British are biting their fingernails about this, it means we can't have joint operations with them, I think, or at least it makes them look much less attractive because we get dragged into their concerns about what they are and aren't allowed to do. And finally, of course, there's an important question, how does this affect Israel? I think that's really hard to predict. Israel is now, strangely, the most highly legalized military in the world. You can go to the Israel Supreme Court directly, and this has been done at least 24 times, they are about to attack me, and I want you to issue an injunction to the military saying not to attack my house. This has actually happened quite a number of times. It's not like America where it would be 2 years of litigation. You go right to the Supreme Court and you say, I have heard that they are planning to attack my house, issue an injunction against it. Sometimes the military goes directly to the Supreme Court and says, we are planning to do this, tell us it is okay. And mostly the Supreme Court looks at it and says, yes, it's okay. They have on a number of occasions said, no, that we think would be disproportional or excessive. So it is very highly legalized already, judicialized, if you like. If they are nonetheless indicted for having gone beyond somebody's notion of what the law of war should be, one possibility is they say, oh, well, we have to double down. We have better lawyers than anyone else in the world. And so, I mean, I've talked to Israeli officials who say this, like, no lawyers are better than our lawyers, so, you know, let's go with that. But it may well have the opposite effect, which is people just say, this is ridiculous. We are trying to play a game which is rigged against us, so we should stop paying attention to this, and we should just accept that we are going to be diplomatically isolated and politically isolated, and that just goes with defending yourself. Where I think we should be particularly thinking about this is, yeah, how they respond to Iran. And the answer to that is, I mean, over the next year, there probably won't be an indictment in that time. Still, it's got to shadow Israel's thinking, and my concern is it inhibits Israel more than it ought to. So, thank you.
Jeremy, thank you. That was splendid. No. Jeremy, take a question or two. May I just ask very quickly, if you didn't touch on this, but I know it's an area that you follow closely, the latest kerfuffle about torture that is now emanating from the EU and so on. Do you expect this to be something that is also brought up on charges? We are brought up on charges in the ICC.
I follow it closely. I just don't know what you're talking about.
Ah. Okay. Well,
I probably follow it in a different language.
In recent days, as I understand it, between this new Dark 30 film and
film.
this
Yes.
business about renditions and the Brits paying for somebody who was subjected to horrible torture.
Yes.
These are the sorts of things that apparently are getting new focus, including up here, as I understand it. And I don't know if anybody on the Hill would like to speak to that, but
I will just add one thing to this, which is, maybe I'm exaggerating the importance of it, but to me it's very telling, which is there were 2 cases about the British Army in Iraq, and someone was actually killed, and someone else was claimed that he was improperly detained. This is the British Army in Iraq. And eventually, relatives or these people went to the European Court of Human Rights, and Britain said, no, come on, we signed the European Convention on Human Rights to say what we would do in Britain. I mean, we never thought it could apply to our army halfway around the world. And the Court of Human Rights said, no, it applies to your army wherever you go. And they said, no, come on, this is a joke. And I really thought this had the chance of a real confrontation, and the British would dig in their heels and say, if that's what the Convention on Human Rights means, right, because you're judged by 3 judges at random, one from Bulgaria, one from, you know, Finland, one from Malta. Right? It's just like lottery draw, and the odds are they don't know anything about running a military operation overseas because they're small countries that don't do it. So it's very threatening, and the British really have kind of backed down on this. I think they agreed to pay. So I think they are intimidated by these things and don't have the stomach. What I guess we shouldn't personalize it, the personal character of leaders. It's telling you something about British politics, right? I think particularly maybe the Tories have the stomach to say, yes, let's stand up to it, but their coalition partners don't. So that's bad, because people who want to drag Britain in front of international tribunals know that Britain can't very credibly threaten to say, well, that's it, we're out of here if you condemn us. That is disturbing.
Or maybe the Tories don't either. Dan?
Your comment on, talk about how it could be a problem between Europeans and America if they move forward with ICC jurisdiction. But isn't there, now correct me if I'm wrong, isn't there an element of the European paradigm that they're moving forward, and even though they might have done these kinds of things in a national sense, civilized behavior is evolving, except for Israel. And therefore, Europe can move beyond that, and it's actually an incentive to not get involved more entanglements, will be less likely to get involved in such things in the future. And the ICC can actually play a positive role in not only ensuring our civilized conduct, but keeping us away from things like that.
I think that is absolutely the way they think. And my point was just, I think that is going to make it harder for the United States to cooperate with Europeans, certainly when it comes to military operations, because they think that way.
Jeremy.
If I were in the Pentagon, I wouldn't want to have a European partner, right, going with me into some serious military intervention where people were shooting back, because your European partners are constantly saying, no, sorry, we have to consult the Attorney General.
Kyle?
In the event that the Palestinians do go forward, and whether the ICC considers an indictment or they get one, what is the possibility, or do you see any realm where a countersuit might be probable or possible? Because, of course, as we know, Hamas actually does commit real war crimes. Like
the rocket attacks were war crimes. They were completely indiscriminate weapons fired at civilian centers. Right? That is a war crime. But what does it mean, a countersuit? I mean, the way the ICC works, the prosecutor gets to decide. I mean, Israel, first of all, is not a member. So it could play the Palestinian game and say, okay, we're not a party to the ICC statute, but we would like to call this situation to your attention. I suppose they could do that. The downside for Israel in doing that is acknowledging that the ICC is the referee. And why would you want to make the ICC the referee when you don't have any confidence that they will be an impartial referee? So I don't think that's real promising for Israel, but I know there are people who are thinking about it. I suppose the other possibility is, okay, don't go to the ICC because that might be just too biased against you, but try to pursue it in some other forum. But I think there's no other forum that quite matches the international prestige of an ICC prosecution. Suppose you get some country that has universal jurisdiction to have an indictment of Hamas. I don't think that will happen because I don't think any other country wants to do this. But let's just say you persuaded Belgium or somebody. The world is not going to be impressed by that. And least impressed will be Hamas, right? And the question you have to ask is, which I think is the central one for this, who is more vulnerable to the loss of international prestige? Israel really has to worry about further isolation because it has valuable trade relations with the world. And the Europeans at some point could say, we're going to start cutting back on your exports to Europe to penalize you. I don't think Hamas worries about this at all. I mean, in principle, they should be worried. They get a lot of international assistance. What if that would be cut back? Is it conceivable to you that the Europeans would say, that's it, too many rocket attacks? They didn't even mention it this time. It wasn't even like put on the table as a possible threat. It just goes without saying that they have to be funded because they're suffering in Gaza, right? So I think if this is a contest between, okay, you give us a black eye, we'll give you a black eye. I mean, a moral black eye. I don't think there's symmetry there, right? It could hurt Israel a lot. I don't actually think it could hurt the Palestinians for people to say, wait, you're terrorists. They boast of that. They're proud of that. They won't feel bad. And if you say, no, not just terrorists, but in violation of international law, I think they'll just laugh.